Good morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you for being part of this WorkSafe webinar. It is great to have you with us as part of the 2021 Health and Safety Month. My name is Cameron Ling and I'll be your host for today's session. While our program of sessions are virtual, we still have the same aims of Health and Safety Month that we do every single year, and that is to keep you up to date. The theme for this year is you learn something new every day. Our session this morning will show health and safety representatives how to respond to workplace gendered violence. You'll be introduced to new gendered violence refresher training for HSRs and tools to help identify and address this serious occupational health and safety issue in your workplace. You will also hear perspectives from a WorkSafe inspector, a HSR who has completed the training, and a specialist HSR trainer in this topic. But now it's time to meet our panellists who are joining us for this session. First of all, Pia Chaviri, OHS Training Unit Lead, Victorian Trades Hall Council. Pia, welcome.
Thanks, Cameron. Good morning.
Great to have you with us. Also joining us is Dr. Libby Brooke, Principal Psychological Health and Safety Specialist, WorkSafe Victoria. Welcome, Libby.
Thanks, Cameron. Good morning.
Great to have you. Also joining us is Chris Vlahogiannis, HSR Multiplex. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Cameron. Thank you very much.
It's great to have the three of you with us. Before I get to each of you and we get into this discussion, just for a little bit of background, work-related gendered violence is a serious occupational health and safety issue. Employers have a responsibility to eliminate the risk of gendered violence so far as is reasonably practicable by removing the hazards associated with those risks. A very effective way to eliminate the risk of gendered violence is to establish and maintain safe and inclusive workplace cultures and systems where disrespect and incivility aren't tolerated. This is a relatively new topic area for WorkSafe. Libby, if I could turn to you, first of all, can you talk us through some of the key factors describing how this is an OHS issue?
Yeah, thanks, Cameron. There have been a lot of changes and we have a very active minister on this topic, which is great. So HSRs and employers need to be really across this information and aware of it. So we've published guidance on this March last year. So it's relatively new, but it took us about a year to develop. So we've been in this space and for quite a while. And when we look at it in the workplace generally, we'll see it come out as work-related violence or bullying complaints. So it's actually something that's been around for quite a while. It's just that we've developed some guidance and we're taking a focus on this.
Well, thanks for that, Libby. Perhaps could we have a bit more information about that? What exactly is the concept of gendered violence and how does sexual harassment fit in?
Yeah, so most people will think of like sexual harassment behaviours, wolf-whistling, inappropriate behaviours towards someone. A lot of people will generally think of that being a male and a female. But gendered violence is broader and a bit more overarching, covering gender or gender identity-based inappropriate behaviours towards other people, and it's sort of looking at that culture. So in March 2021, WorkSafe launched the Sexual Harassment Let's Be Very Clear campaign, and people resonated with the concept of sexual harassment at work. And so using this campaign was a good first step for employers and health and safety professionals to know we are in this space. This is something that WorkSafe is interested in, and making sure that people are safe at work in regards to sexual harassment and gendered violence. So we need to reiterate how important it is to understand that concept and to be prevention focused. So otherwise you're just putting out spot fires.
Thanks for that, Libby. If I could move to you, Pia, now. You work at the Victorian Trades Hall Council with members right across the state. Gendered violence includes lots of behaviours. Could you give us some examples of what these may look like?
Sure, absolutely. So gendered violence can come in many forms. So it's often directed towards somebody in the workplace by other parties at work. That can include whether that's managers or people coming into the site or colleagues or students. So it can come from all directions, and the behaviours can include anything from extreme sort of sexual harassment behaviours like sexual innuendo and so on, but also can be making jokes about women, making jokes about gay people, picking on somebody because they don't conform to what is perceived as the gendered stereotype of how we're meant to behave supposedly in society. So it comes in many forms, from quite subtle through to very overt behaviours that cause harm.
I imagine as well, though, there are still a lot of misconceptions out there that gendered violence is a situation where a man, generally in a position of power or influence, is committing acts against a younger woman. But that's not always the case, is it, Pia?
No, it's not, Cameron. It also can, so definitely that is an occurrence that can occur, but it also includes any kind of behaviour directed towards somebody who might identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender or intersex. So that could be in the form of jokes or complaints about a transgender person using a certain toilet in the workplace. It could be being dismissive about somebody in terms of sexuality, or making sort of overarching comments about the expectations around people based on perceptions of their sexuality and how you would expect them to be in the workplace, etc. So those sort of jokes and behaviours can cause harm and injury, as well as also being directed at anyone who doesn't conform. So perhaps jokes about the way you expect a man or a woman to behave in the workplace. So an example might be a man who wants to be able to, or has to be able to, leave work early to pick up his children from school, but gets comments made about him that are derogatory. The idea that he's under his wife's thumb, that kind of comment is common, and we hear about that. So certainly happens in many forms, although we would say that overarchingly it is perpetrated by men, usually against women in the majority of times.
Thanks for sharing that with us, Pia. If I could turn now to you, Chris. You work in a male-dominated industry, construction, and you are a health and safety rep. Why is the work of HSRs so important in prevention of gendered workplace violence at Multiplex?
Great question, Cameron. I feel that HSRs have a very important role in gendered violence at Multiplex because it's a very serious issue, and we are a Tier 1 builder who's very active in ensuring that our work sites are free of any discrimination, harassment, bullying, sexism. It's important for us at Multiplex because we all come to earn money, we all come to do productive work, and we need a safe work site which is inclusive of all people and is a productive work site, but most importantly, it has to be a happy work site. For me, as a HSR, it's very important for me that my employees, or the employees that are underneath, that are part of my work site, are coming to work with a positive mindset and knowing they can do their job without being targeted for who they are. So, I've been in the industry for 17 years, and I've seen how the industry's changed dramatically over those years. And I've seen a lot of inclusion with females and members of the LGBTQI community, and not only in management roles but also in worksite roles as well. And it's pretty important for us that the old caveman mentality is gone, and the times have changed, and HSRs learn and teach that gendered violence is unacceptable in any way, shape or form.
A really strong message, Chris. Thank you for that. I understand that HSRs have an entitlement to attend training if they ask to attend these courses. However, it is not compulsory for HSRs to be trained. WorkSafe actively encourages HSRs to take up their training entitlements. Pia, you are a trainer in OHS. Can you give us an overview of the HSR Gendered Violence one-day refresher and what it covers?
Absolutely. So we talk about, we start with trying to teach participants to identify gendered violence, because we're really interested in identifying and pulling out the more subtle versions and the systems and structures that can lie behind the behaviours that then creates an environment in which some of those more overt and extreme behaviours tend to happen. So first of all, we look at diagnosis, we look at risk in the workplace, then we look at using tools such as the traditional hierarchy of controls to then address and mitigate those risks. And there are plenty of ways to do that, although it can be challenging because some of those hazards do present as psychosocial hazards in the workplace. So they're actually harder, I guess, in some ways to look at and deal with than maybe a trip hazard or a faulty machine and so on. But certainly they can be dealt with in that way. We look at strategizing with HSRs to examine the ways they can actually put things in place to ensure that the workplace is safer. And as Libby's pointed out as well, we're really looking at prevention as well. So we want HSRs to leave that training feeling very confident that they can go back into the workplace and put strategies in place to prevent the issue from occurring in the first place.
And Pia, I wonder, what's the response been with your colleagues and members? Any challenges?
Definitely there's challenges. It's a controversial or confronting topic in some ways. People can often see it as a personal issue between a couple of people in the workplace. They can see it as behaviour that's not really, something that an individual does or an individual has a problem with, but don't see it necessarily as something that's the work's responsibility to address. So certainly trying to educate people around that is really important and one of the barriers that we've had to overcome. Also, I think trying to engage people to understand that what we're trying to do is elevate everybody's safety in the workplace. We're not there to lecture or to come in and tell people what to do. We're actually trying to engage the training participants to collaborate with us and come with us to transform their workplace into a much safer working environment for all parties.
Thanks for that, Pia. Chris, if I could jump back to you for just a second, what made you put up your hand for the training?
Definitely wanted to make a change in the industry. I think it was very important to see change. It's obviously this is a very important topic to me, and I want to be a part of leading the change in the construction industry.
So you've done the training yourself. What did you get out of it? And have you seen any positive impacts or challenges of the training in your workplace?
Definitely seen many positive impacts, obviously, in our workplace. We've held many toolbox meetings on site with all of the employees, and everyone's on board with this topic. It's a very, very important topic because everyone has been impacted with gendered violence or knows someone that's been impacted with gendered violence on the work site. The training for me, it was very informative, and I recommend it highly to any HSRs out there because it helped me with dealing with approaching a lot of gendered violence issues differently, and gave me different approaches with how to deal with it.
Oh, that's great to hear, Chris. Libby, can I come back to you? And Pia and Chris have been talking about with this training about preventing some of these things happening. Why is prevention so important, both from an employer and an employee perspective? What are the misconceptions we should be dispelling?
Yeah, so prevention is always better. If you've got a workplace where they have a culture that doesn't accept gendered violence behaviours, the risk of injury then from that gendered violence or lack of gender obviously is reduced. So it's really important to make sure that you have a culture that doesn't accept those behaviours. So if we're looking at, workplaces, sometimes they'll think, as we've talked about before, it could be in any workplace. It doesn't necessarily happen in workplaces where there are males and females. It could be a male-dominated workplace where there's people who don't prescribe to the social norms, and it may be in any workplace, and it's really important just to understand that from a risk perspective.
Thanks for that, Libby. Pia, this is obviously a very top-of-mind issue for employers and workers. What plans do you have to extend the messaging with your members?
Thanks, Cameron. It's a great question. We're actually in the process of updating the HSR one-day refresher that we did develop with WorkSafe. And part of that was running a trial or a pilot earlier this year, which we've just completed. So we're making a few updates. So certainly it's about improving the package of training that we have, because we do have one day to talk about what is a very complex issue. And we're trying to maximise that one day day of training to ensure that training participants leave the sessions feeling skilled up and ready to deal with the issue when they go back into their workplaces. In addition to that, we continue with our campaign that we've been running from Trades Hall for 5 years, I think now, and that campaign has been focusing on eradicating gendered violence as a workplace issue. And the work continues because obviously it's a huge issue and a huge challenge. So those would be the primary focus that we have at this point, to continue the work, and certainly to invite people who want to come and learn more to come along to our training if they're eligible, and register and come and see us for the day.
Thank you for that, Pia, and thank you to the three of you for sharing some of those insights. I'd really love to get to some questions, if that's okay, because we've got so many from our audience right now firing questions left, right and centre. So really keen to get into this topic. And I think all of you have said it can be a complicated topic, but also if you are able to work through it, a really important one, and can set up a great culture at any workplace. Happy for any of you or all of you to answer these questions. I'll try and steer them as best I possibly can. But a lot of our audience are asking this one: what powers do HSRs have to deal with these types of matters? Who wants to field that one first up?
Well, I think we definitely have a lot of power on the worksite in regards to dealing with these issues. And we do use the IH&S Act when it comes to these issues, because we don't tolerate any bullying, harassment, sexism or racism on site. And I think we've got to use, all the powers that we have, which we do have quite a lot, to benefit us and to ensure that this gendered violence doesn't occur in the worksite.
Cameron, can I add to Chris's point?
Certainly, Pia, go for it.
I also wanted to back up what Chris is saying, of course, but the other thing is to really emphasise that this is no different to a physical hazard. Like a psychosocial hazard in the workplace is just as potentially risky, harmful, causes injury. And yes, it can be harder to see, but we also want to ensure that we're able to tackle it seriously, take it seriously, and it can be dealt with. So it is really about not seeing it as something that falls outside of the Act. It actually is covered under the Act, which means HSRs do have the capacity to address it at work.
Great, thank you for that, Pia. And I'll put this one to you, and maybe it's to you as well, Libby, and it flows on a little bit from what you were just touching on there, Pia, around sometimes the physical ones can be seen much clearer. A lot of people asking this question: what risk controls can be put into place to prevent these types of hazards? As plant and equipment won't be appropriate, people can ignore policies and procedures.
So we would say that there are a lot of different options that can be put in place. So we could look at systems of work, so changing practices. We could look at physical layout of workplaces. We could look at the way tools are used in the workplace. So even though we may not be thinking about machinery or trip hazards, as I've talked about already, or holes in the ground, we are still in a work site where we have practices, systems of work. We have tools around us, whether that's where our desk sits, whether it's where we walk every day, whether it's who we work with. So it's about examining and analysing that whole working environment and putting in place measures. So, and some of those obviously are education and training, policies and procedures, but we know they're lower order controls and on their own do not stand up to scrutiny. We also need to be looking at the broader systems and structures that inform that workplace. And there are plenty of ways to do that and to address those. We could talk about that all day with examples, but we don't have time.
Libby, would you like to add anything to what Pia is talking about there?
Yeah, thanks. I think leadership is key as well when it comes to creating that culture and making sure that people understand at the workplace what behaviours won't be tolerated. Some industries have known risks as well. So it may be aged care services. There may be known risks that they can then use systems to actually look at identifying and preventing in different ways as well. So industries and different workplaces have different risk controls that they can put in depending on where that risk is coming from.
Libby, can I stay with you for a second for this next question? Are display materials covering this topic, such as posters, available from WorkSafe? I would like to highlight this hazard at my workplace.
That's a really great question. We do have some previous campaign material. We do have some, it is available to access. If you have a look at our website, there's also some more material on Workwell Toolkit as well. So if you have a look at the Workwell Toolkit and our website, you should be able to find links to information that you can use.
Great, thank you for that, Libby. Pia, I'm going to steer this one in your direction, but please, if anyone wants to jump in, do so. A number of our audience are asking, is the training available to those who are not HSRs as well?
The training we're talking about today is specifically HSR training. So it's the one-day refresher endorsed by WorkSafe. So that is definitely directed at HSRs, but we're also available to do secondary consultations or to talk about other options around receiving education around this topic. So we're more than happy to take calls or emails if my details are made available about the topic and to talk to people further.
I'm just going to jump in there as well.
Okay,
just in regards with the training, I've done the training and I've held site toolbox meetings at my workplace, and I've definitely used the training to inform the work site in this topic. And I think if all HSRs do that and obviously do the training, this specific training, and then have toolbox meetings on site and inform the work sites of what they've learnt and spoken about it, I think everyone learns as well. So,
great. Thank you, Chris. I'm going to stay with you for this next question too. What options do I have as a HSR if I report issues like this topic to my employer, but my employer could be the person demonstrating these negative behaviours?
Well, you definitely got to go see your HSR. If it's your employer that would be doing it, you'd have to deal with it in a matter where you have to involve your HSR. And then your HSR would have to get involved in this topic, and there's obviously ways around it where you deal with it in a way where you have to eliminate it and sit down, and as a HSR you'd have to sit down and talk with the person that's been impacted by this gendered violence, and then deal with it accordingly.
Is this something, Libby, where the HSR can bring WorkSafe involved as well?
Yeah. So if the HSR wants, it's always an option. Anyone can call in to WorkSafe. The HSR can, if they feel that there is a risk, they have the option of putting a pin. If that becomes disputed, then WorkSafe can come in as well. So there are many avenues where WorkSafe can support the HSR to go through that process. Absolutely.
I think this one's going to you, Pia, but again, please jump in, whoever wants to answer it. A lot of our audience asking, what specialist dedicated support for HSRs do WorkSafe provide? Also, what specialist support for HSRs do VTHC, Victorian Trades Hall Council, provide? Just getting all these different letters right in my head right now as I ask that question, but Pia, that one's to you, I think.
Sure. Well, I think partly for Libby as well, but I think Libby's team obviously can handle a lot of inquiries and addressing this issue as well. But certainly at VTHC in the OHS training unit, we are trained and subject matter experts in this topic, and we're more than capable to provide any kind of insight, information, guidance, advice, whatever sort, in terms of dealing with gendered violence in the workplace. And it's something that we've been researching and working on for some years now. So we can definitely provide support there. In addition, I would say that many of our affiliates, our affiliated unions, also have the skills and capacity to address the issue, because they also have been part of this campaign to eradicate gendered violence as a workplace issue.
Great. Thank you, Pia. Libby, do you have anything to add to that question from a WorkSafe perspective?
Sure. From our perspective, in the first instance, inspectors can go out and assist, and if they need support, that's where my team will come in. So definitely specialist support available if required. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Libby. Chris, I'll direct this one to you. A lot of people here asking, can you give an example of how you have dealt with a gender violence incident in the workplace? And Libby, Pia, please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, definitely. I've had a gendered violence incident on a workplace recently where there's been a male worker who was taking photos of himself with a female worker on site and posting inappropriate comments on his social media about the female on the job, and she informed me. So we had to deal with it in a way where firstly we had to ask her what she wanted to do with it, or how she wanted the issue dealt with, and then she informed us that she wanted him to stop doing that. So I had to grab both parties and sit them down and pretty much support her 100% with the issue, and tell him to take the stuff down from his social media and give him an official warning, and tell him that it's unacceptable what he's doing, and it won't be tolerated, and if he does it again, he'll be kicked off site. Very, very simple. We've got a zero policy to that. So,
thank you for that, Chris. Libby or Pia, anything you'd like to add?
I think in terms of that particular example that Chris has given, which I had heard of before from Chris, I think what's really important there is that Chris has centred the needs of the affected party. So he sat down with her, asked her what she needed. And I know from other discussions, the focus was on the behaviour stopping, not necessarily the person leaving site, but the behaviour stopping. And that's what we also really want to emphasise, that it's the behaviour that is the hazard, not the individual, because the behaviour arises from a workplace culture or systems of practice that end up allowing for that kind of behaviour to occur. So the behaviour needs to stop rather than the person necessarily needing to be moved on, because our view is that if you move that person on but you've done nothing about the workplace culture, another person will just fill the void. So we need to make sure that we're talking about things like what Chris is alluding to, with regular toolbox discussions in that work setting, or regular team meeting discussions in other settings, a zero tolerance for the behaviours, and also understanding that there's systems in place in which we can not just call it out, but actually effectively eradicate, if not prevent, the behaviour occurring in the first place.
Well, can I pose the next question to you then, Pia, as well, because I think it flows on a little bit from what you're talking about there. What administrative control measures can lead to elimination of the hazard? How can we ensure these controls are adhered to?
Sure, great. Well, what we would often talk about is education and training in that part of the hierarchy of controls. So administrative controls could be policies. In terms of adherence, that is challenging, but there needs to be checks and measures put in place to any control that's put into a workplace. So we don't want to just see tick box strategies where we say, oh, well, we've got a policy that sits over here, and if people can find it, they can enact it, or a few people did training a year or two ago and that's that. We never thought about it again. My view, and I am a trainer, is that the training is not sufficient. A day of training will not change systems and structures and cultural norms that have been developed over centuries. These are not things that have just arisen out of nowhere, and they are reinforced by the society we live in. So from my point of view, education and training is just one part of the puzzle to eradicate the issue or prevent the issue from occurring. But in addition to education and training, if we're not going to commit to follow up, if we're not going to commit to actually checking in 6 months, in 12 months, in 18 months that actually we're doing something with what we learned, then I think that it becomes ineffectual. So to me, all of those practices need to be put in place with actual backup systems of accountability. But in addition to that, I would say, in fact, we want to be looking higher up the hierarchy of controls to actually seek to eliminate the hazard in the first place. So that also can be achieved, and I think education's part of it, but not the sole solution.
Really important messages there. Thank you for that, Pia. Libby, I want to ask you this next one. A number of our audience wanting to know, where does the HR department stand on this, as well as the Equal Employment Opportunity Officer?
That's really a great question, because in situations like this, it really becomes a group effort. There is a component that HR will look after. There is a very clear health and safety obligation as well, and they do overlap when it comes to equal opportunities. From our perspective, obviously, we look at it from a health and safety perspective and making sure that the systems are in place to reduce that risk or eliminate it so far as reasonably practicable. So when it comes to prevention, but these systems need to actually work together for them to actually be effective. So HR needs to be able to support health and safety, and they need to be able to work together to identify and control these risks.
Great. Thank you, Libby. Chris, I want to come to you on this one, because it is a question, as you've already touched on, around male-dominated workplaces, which construction is. When culture in male-dominated workplaces and socially is to openly laugh and make sexual and discriminatory remarks and derogatory jokes re women, how does one woman combat that, especially when all other staff are participating and see no harm in it?
She has to go see her HSR, and we have a role and responsibility as HSRs to support all our workers on site. And we need to make it very, very clear that in our toolbox meetings, not only in our toolbox meetings, but also when we're walking on site speaking to all workers on site, we've got to make it very clear that we've got a zero policy with any harassment, any sexism, any racist remarks towards females or any workers on site. And I always say, very simple, if you're going to treat someone, especially females on construction sites, treat them as if they're your sister, your wife, your daughter, or a family member, and ask the question, would you like a family member being dealt or suffering in the way that these people have suffered, on site? So if you highlight it like that, I think it helps get the point across. So.
Great. Thank you for that, Chris. Pia, this one for you, and it's a broad question, but a very, very important question coming from our audience. How do we change our workplace cultures?
Well, there's plenty of ways. So I think we need to have really strong systems in place, like having elected HSRs. Elected HSRs have a very critical role in the workplace. We need to have leadership, as Libby has talked about as well, who are committed to a healthy workplace culture. I think we need to have it to be present at multi-levels of a workplace. So we need to ensure that everybody at all layers, all levels of the workplace, and those coming into the workplace understand what is expected in that workplace. So that can be achieved through different means. Part of it can be around promoting or advertising the intention of that workplace. So having signage up, which we see in some workplaces, that indicates, what behaviour is tolerated, what behaviour is not tolerated. I think if it is a workplace where you do have things like toolbox meetings, team meetings, or other kinds of discussions, peer-to-peer support, etc., that we're embedding the conversation or embedding the intention into our workplaces, so it doesn't just come tokenistically. So I really want to emphasise that. There's no point doing tick box activities to say, yep, we did training 2 years ago, we put a policy in place 2 years ago and no one's looked at it since. We want to embed these practices. And in addition, I think it's important that these are discussions that we acknowledge happen outside the workplace. So they're likely to come into the workplace, and we have to look at how do we want to improve that workplace setting to hopefully have some of that influence going back out with people as they enter and exit that workplace setting.
Great. Thank you, Pia. I'm going to stay with you for this next one. If I want to register to attend the HSR training, how can I do this?
go to the VTHC or Victorian Trades Hall Council OHS Reps training page, and you can register. There's a registration link there.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that. Libby, I'll ask you this one. Do you see any sort of policy or legislative changes on the horizon?
Yes, our minister announced that psychosocial hazard regulations will be developed. So we're currently in that process of going through developing those.
Fantastic. Thank you. Chris, or perhaps Libby as well, could answer this one. I heard WorkSafe has a special HSR support team. Is this correct? How can I get their help?
Yep. The best way to get support is to call our advisory line and to request that there are people who are focused on supporting HSRs. Yes, just call the advisory line.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next one here, and a number of people asking this one. Please put your hand up, whoever wants to answer this. Another separate course for HSRs, question mark. Why can't this training be included in the 5-day course? It sounds like this type of training should be for supervisors and managers rather than HSRs having to deal with gendered violence issues, even as incidents, bullying, etc., are likely to be confidential. Who'd like to weigh in on that question?
I'm happy to suggest that. I definitely think that managers and team leaders, etc., also need to attend training in this topic for sure. But I also think that HSRs have a very pivotal and powerful role in the workplace and can make change and influence change in that regard. But yeah, certainly I'd support ideally all members of a workplace actually participating in training. And Cameron, I did want to add that we actually do have training coming up on the 11th of November, which is a Thursday. So if people do want to get in on that session, they should jump on that website and register as soon as possible.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Pia. Chris or Libby, in response to that last one, anything you'd like to add?
I totally agree with Pia. I think that the management should definitely be on board with this subject. But I think it's also very important for the HSRs to be the leaders in ensuring that gendered violence is eliminated from the work sites. We are elected representatives of the workers, and we should be doing this training, and we should be identifying and eliminating this problem from the work site. And we can only do that by having a zero policy to this topic and keeping our work sites informed about it as well.
Great. Thank you for that, Chris. Before we finish up, though, I just wonder if I could get one brief final message from all of you for our audience today, perhaps starting with you, Libby.
Sure. So from our perspective, duty holders must, as far as reasonably practicable, provide and maintain that working environment that's safe and without risk to health. And that includes by eliminating or reducing that risk of gendered violence.
Thanks for that, Libby. And you, Pia?
Adding to what Libby has just said, I really want to emphasise that gendered violence is not just the problem of women or LGBTIQ people or those who are directly affected as the victim of that behaviour, but also it is on everybody's shoulders to ensure that workplaces are safe and healthy and that we all return home every day in one piece, whether that's psychologically or physically. So for me, it's really emphasising that we all have a role to play in eradicating gendered violence in the workplace and ensuring that we're all healthy.
Very important. Thank you for that, Pia. And what about you, Chris? What would you like to leave for our audience today?
I'd just like to say that gendered violence is a very, very important OH&S issue, and it needs to be treated with the same seriousness as a faulty piece of plant or a scaffold that doesn't have a scaff tag or a faulty crane. So it's very, very important that we identify this and understand that it can cause serious harm and injury to workers on site and in workforces. And yeah, just pretty much we need to eliminate gendered violence from our work sites or reduce the risk to harm to the workforce.
Thank you for that, Chris. And thank you to all three of you and for everyone who's sent those questions in. As I mentioned today, the WorkSafe website has a heap of great resources, guides and tools, as our panellists have spoken about, if you want any more information on this topic. WorkSafe is always helping to ensure Victorian workers are supported to get through these tough times. Issues around gendered violence and sexual harassment are important and affect many of us in the workplace. That finishes up our webinar today. Pia, thank you so much for joining us and all the best with all the work that you're doing.
Thanks very much, Cameron.
And to you, Libby, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Cameron.
And Chris as well, really appreciate your time and all the best for the rest of the day.
Thank you very much, Cameron.
Great to have our three panellists there sharing their stories and giving a bit of information. We hope that you found this a really interesting and informative session. Remember, just importantly, if you do have something you need to discuss urgently, there is the WorkSafe advisory line and emergency line. So please jump on those if you need to discuss anything urgently. We're going to make a note on the screen shortly, a list of some of the contacts that we've talked about today that you may find helpful. If you have any requests for further information, we recommend please get in touch with us. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for engaging with us and all of those questions that you sent through. Have a great day.